The D&D world keeps insisting you need a session 0, but it feels like everyone's talking about something different and acts like you're doing it wrong if you're not following their version. So it made me wonder, is session 0 a scam, really? Because this debate creates a huge problem. If you can't tell which advice applies to your table, you either skip something important or waste game time on the wrong prep. So in this video, I will show you exactly why the session 0 debate is so confusing and what the term actually hides, so you finally know what your group actually needs and don't kill your next game before it even starts. Right, so to start, I'd like to ask you something. What do you think about when I say, what's your session 0 like? I think you could ask 3 different DMs and get 3 completely different answers. First one would say, we do a 2-hour meeting about safety tools and expectations, then everyone goes home. Another one might say, we run an entire 4-hour session of world building and we don't even touch dice. And the last one, I just send a Google form and we do a 30-minute-ish Zoom call. And yeah, you could say different people play in different ways. Big deal. But I think it's a good idea to ask, are these even the same thing? Because we certainly call them the same. There is some kind of definition chaos happening around the term session 0. And it creates the following problem. People talk past each other. Some people argue that session 0 is essential, and I think those people are often thinking about games with strangers or horror games that, yeah, kind of require some safety tools. And on the other end, there's the session 0 is a waste, folks. And full disclaimer, I used to be more on that side, before I realized it's probably largely because I've been mostly playing with friends I've known since before high school, and we kinda know each other really well at this point. As much as I don't want to be the answers in the middle guy in this case, I think both sides can be correct for their specific context. But they're arguing like there's one universal answer. Right, so what do we do? I think what is happening is the term session 0 has kinda outgrown its usefulness. It's become a catch-all term for 7 very different practices that you can actually mix and match. Therefore, treating it like a single do or don't binary choice is kinda like asking whether you should use tools when building furniture. Like, which tools? What furniture? For what purpose? So to solve this, here's what I think we need to do. First, we need to map out what session 0 actually encompasses. What components or practices are taken for granted and hiding under that label. Then we need to figure out which components solve which problems. And third, we need to find a way to determine what your group actually needs. But before I take you through these 3 steps and find a solution, I think you need to understand something about how this whole session 0 term emerged. Because the history reveals exactly why this debate got so confusing in the first place. I did some research for this video, and I could not really find the specific term session 0 on the internet before the year 2000. Now, for the sake of clarity, I'm not saying people never did the things people do during session 0 before 2000. Or that absolutely nobody on Earth ever used it before them. I'm saying that the term was not mainstream enough to be a thing and leave a trace on the internet. A great article by Justin Alexander, aka the Alexandrian, talks about this. As far as D&D is concerned, the first time a related wording appears in an official sourcebook seems to be in the D&D 3.0 Player's Handbook, as Step 0, check with your Dungeon Master for character creation. Gaming forums started using session 0 around 2003, but it didn't go mainstream until 2012, and Wizards of the Coast didn't officially use session 0 in published materials until 2020 with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which is 17 years after the community started using it a lot. This means that neither Gary Gygax or the angry nerd playing D&D in the 80s or your uncle's legendary AD&D campaign used the term session 0, and that gaming thrived for 30-some years without this formalized practice. And I think this is why many folks still argue it's a scam or just, useless. It's a if it's not broken, why fix it kind of situation. So what changed? Why did we suddenly need to systematize something that used to happen organically? I think what happened is this. As tabletop gaming moved online and its popularity increased, as convention play with strangers grew, and as campaigns got more complex and safety awareness increased, the informal, let's figure this out as we go approach started breaking down. Because you can't really rely on organic social navigation when you're playing with internet strangers via Roll20. So the community formalized it. We took all those scattered conversations, the what kind of game is this, the are we allowing PvP, the let me tell you about my character, and we bundled them into this ritualized pregame session. And that's good, A solution to a problem emerged. But I think a few things went wrong in the process. By formalizing it, we made it prescriptive. These are problems you might need to solve became you must do session 0. And the checklist of things to do became more important than understanding what the checklist was solving. Different groups formalized different things. Safety tools became very important for some people, when others really focused on collaborative world building or party cohesion. Everyone was doing their version of session 0 and arguing that everyone else was doing it wrong. So what's actually inside this term? I mentioned a bit earlier in the video that there are 7 components, practices hiding beneath the Session 0 umbrella. Different groups mix and match some of these, and they're all important for what we'll discuss later. Component 1 is logistics coordination. When do we play? How often do we play? What's our cancellation policy? Who brings the snacks? Etc., etc. This is the boring stuff that can definitely kill campaigns if we ignore it. It's like checking if we actually have the address the party's gonna be at. It's necessary, but often does not need a formal session. Then we have component 2, the safety and boundaries discussion. This is all about trauma triggers, content warnings, phobias, what absolutely cannot appear in this game, etc. conversation. It covers everything from we're keeping this PG-13 to complex consent forms. It tends to be more needed with strangers or horror content, and maybe less needed with established groups playing straightforward heroic fantasy, but we'll come back to this. Component 3 is rules clarification. House rules, death mechanics, allowed content, and homebrew restrictions. It helps avoid the I built my character around this spell and now you're saying it's banned thing, which can lead to disaster. When the DM runs unusual house rules or uses content restrictions, it becomes really important. Then we have component 4, which is character integration. How do we avoid the we're strangers in a tavern thing a lot of us are familiar with? So it's all about creating pre-existing relationships between the characters to establish party cohesion and prevent the lone wolf character syndrome. By the way, on this specific aspect, I made a free resource to help you and your players avoid the most common character creation traps, which you can find in the video description. Component 5 is the collaborative world-building thing. When players create NPCs, factions, locations, and campaign truths together, it really helps create narrative authority and creative ownership. You don't have to do it. It's kind of optional. Some groups love it, and some think it's the DM's job and a waste of time. Then we have component 6, which is tone and expectation alignment. Are we playing Terminator or Titanic? Is the game gonna be combat heavy with lots of tactical play, or more roleplay focused, with emphasis shifted on narrative aspects? It is important for complex or unusual campaigns, maybe slightly less for straightforward D&D. Component 7 is campaign premise delivery. You try to answer the what's this campaign actually about question. Just basic intel so players can build characters that won't feel out of place. This is the, man, if you had told us this was gonna be an underwater campaign, maybe I wouldn't have created a fire wizard component. So we have these 7 components, and any combination of these creates a completely different experience at the table. A 4-hour session hitting all 7 isn't close to a 15-minute conversation covering only 2 of those, but we call both session 0. So I think it's a good idea to start thinking in terms of components. And forget about the label for a bit. For your next campaign, you identify which ones you actually need and you match the appropriate solution to each need. Alright, this is all well and good, but how do I figure out which ones my group needs? Well, I'm glad you asked. That's where a lot of DMs get stuck. So I'm going to take you on a complete step-by-step diagnostic process to help you solve this. But before I do so, if you're finding this helpful, let's make a deal together. You click subscribe, and I promise to keep making better and better videos. Think of videos as loot. You want loot, right? Alright, so diagnostic. Let's think about how a doctor diagnoses an illness and decides on a treatment for a patient. Some people do need antibiotics, but some people need rest or surgery. So let's stop treating this as a binary, do or don't, and go through this simple 3-question process to figure out what your table needs. Question 1, do we know each other? And this is not as easy as it seems at first, because I think there are 2 layers here. First one is, am I playing with strangers or new acquaintances? If yes, then you probably need most of these components. The safety discussion, character integration, expectation alignment, etc. Because you're building trust from scratch. But even if you know the people, do you really know them? I mean, you might be friends with someone, but not know they have this deep, weird phobia because it just never came up before. So just a simple question, like anything you guys really don't want to see in the game goes a long way. But most of the time, in that case, you probably need maybe 2-3 specific components, like focusing on logistics, rules clarification, and campaign premise. Most of the rest you already know. If you're playing with a mixed group with some friends and some new people, then you guessed it. I think a medium approach works well there. Focus on integrating the new players and establishing baseline safety. Once this is done, you move on to the second question, which is, what's our actual risk? This is when you think about your campaign specifically. If you're playing in a complex homebrew world and like unusual rules, you can't really skip the rules clarification and campaign premise components. Horror, mature content, or sensitive themes require the safety and boundaries components. We've touched on that before. Even if you're playing with friends, maybe you've only played very tactical games with them before, and this time it's all about the narrative. So in this case, the tone and expectation alignment components matter. Once you've answered this, then you move on to question 3, which is all about timing. What's our time constraint? This is when you need to be honest about your specific group's reality. If you guys only meet twice a month and coordinating is hard because, life tends to get in the way, try to minimize prep sessions and to maximize actual play. Use email or Discord for most components and reserve in-person time and calls for what absolutely requires everyone together. The perfect game is a game only if you play it. On the other end, if your group meets in person weekly and scheduling is not a problem, then 1, I'm jealous. 2, congrats. And 3, you can afford more alignment time without sacrificing play frequency. You should also consider whether this is going to be a one-shot or short campaign, in which case you should probably try and streamline everything, because you probably don't need elaborate character integration for a 4-session adventure, or a long campaign, which will benefit from more time spent at this step. Session 0 isn't a scam, but I think the way we talk about it kind of is. We took 7 different practices, bundled them under one label, then argued about whether that label is good or bad while ignoring the actual problems those practices solve. The real question should not be session 0 yes or no, but which specific alignment problems exist in my situation and what's the most efficient way to solve them. Sometimes that's a 90-minute formal session. Sometimes it's a 5-minute conversation. Sometimes it's a Google form plus a Discord call. The format doesn't really matter, but the alignment does. Stop letting the label dictate your prep and start thinking like the doctor we talked about. So this is cool, but once you've done the work and are ready to play, you still have one problem. Where do you start? How do you prep? It would be a shame to have come so far to then have a terrible first playing session. To avoid this, I think it's a good idea to look at how pro DMs like Brennan Lee Mulligan approach prep. So click on this video next to find the surprisingly simple method he uses and why you should probably not take as many notes.